We're looking into Proverbs tonight. I don't remember exactly what I titled this lesson, but to get to the title, I'll first ask you a question. Do you have a favorite quote from the movie Forrest Gump? What was that movie? Was it called Forrest Gump? Yeah. It seemed like there were a lot of quotes came out of that movie. Life is like a box of chocolates. And who can't ever forget, I love you, Jenny. And Lieutenant Dan. But there was another one that I heard him say that I had to think about for quite a while, but then it just kind of hit me and made perfect sense. Stupid is as stupid does. And that might not sound very nice, but it's very practical and it's very accurate. Stupid is as stupid. If you do stupid things, that's what stupid is. Wow, that's a hard truth, but it really is a truth, and that's what Solomon talks about a lot in Proverbs. But he doesn't use the word stupid. What word does he use? Fool or foolish. That's what Solomon talks about in Proverbs. And I found as a young man, perhaps more than any other writing in the whole Bible, Proverbs helped me. Because there's even a passage in Proverbs that said, foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child. You remember the rest of it? The rod of reproof will drive it far from him. And sometimes the rod of reproof is or are the results of you doing dumb things, stupid things. And so as I would do dumb things in my youth, I would take note and say, that I don't like that. Maybe there's a reason why that happened, and maybe it's me. And so I started finding out that there were a lot of things in Proverbs that helped me get some bad habits changed and get squared away. And so I offer these things because it's not just in our youth that Proverbs can help us. But I did find this. In chapter 3 is one of the places where Solomon, and by the way, remember Solomon is talking to his son. That's the context of the Proverbs, and he's telling his son what his father taught him, who was David, I gave it away. Who was Solomon's dad? Well, that's David. I think you all knew that, didn't you? So that's the context, and here's what he says in chapter 3, verse 13. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding for her profit. He speaks of wisdom as a woman, as if she is a woman, personifies her as a woman to his son. Her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold, and she is more precious than jewels. Nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. Now, as a young man, even though a lot of young men don't want to admit it, what's a young man looking for but a young woman? I thought I'd hear some amens on that, but I didn't get too many amens. Maybe times have changed. I don't think they've changed that much. But as a young man, I found, wow, Solomon talks about wisdom as if she is a woman. Now, why was woman created in the first place? The man needed help. And so God made a woman, made her in his image to help the man. And that's exactly what wisdom does. It helps the man, especially the young man, but any man who looks into this will be helped. Wisdom is as much a helper as anything else could be. Wisdom is what we need, and sometimes that's what we find, well, always I think that's what we find in our wives. Is room for amen on that? Okay, all right. I knew I'd get some there. So, thinking about Proverbs in that context, let's take a look at some of the things it says about foolishness. And the reason we do this is so we can avoid some of the some of the behaviors that Solomon says are foolish and lead to no good thing. Chapter 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools, however, despise wisdom and instruction. It's interesting, the first part, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If you look at chapter 9 and verse 10, Solomon will write there, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So knowledge and wisdom begin with fear of God. You can't have any true knowledge or true wisdom without fear of God. But what about fools? They despise wisdom. They despise instruction. Why is that? Is it just because they're foolish? Most people who are foolish have this sense about them that they already know everything they need to know. And if you have any sense at all, you know that can never be true. We always have things we can learn. There's always a little more knowledge, a little more enlightenment to be gained. But fools don't have that idea about themselves. They think they already know it all, and so they despise wisdom and instruction. That's one mark of a fool. He despises wisdom and instruction. Doesn't want to listen to it, doesn't want to hear it. Chapter 1 again, verse 32. The waywardness of the naive will kill him, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. Complacent. I thought I had a pretty good handle on what the word complacent means. That's the word that's translated here in the English. Complacent means showing smug or uncritical satisfaction with one's self or one's achievements. In other words, you look at yourself and you go, hey, I'm a pretty good guy. I'm pretty sharp. I got it together. I'm pretty wise. That's the smugness that Solomon's talking about here. And he says that kind of a view of yourself will destroy you. Can you think of why that might be so? You never move on to anything better. You never move on to anything else. You never examine yourself to see if you might do better, achieve more. Why are there mirrors in our houses? Just to torment us? You have a mirror in your bathroom so you can see what needs to be fixed, and you stand in front of it and you go, okay, my hair needs to go this way, and I need something on my face, or whatever it might be. I think I need a shave. I don't know how many times I've thought, oh, scared me. I was getting ready to go out somewhere and I haven't even shaved because I just forget about shaving sometimes. Yeah, this happens. I clean shave myself every night and I wake up with this. So, but that's what mirrors are for. They show us things that need to change. And when you, what kind of a person would say, I don't need to look in the mirror? That's the kind of person that hurts everybody else to look at them. So complacency. That's a mark of a fool. Don't allow yourself to become complacent, to think you've already arrived and you are there and you've got it all. We're shooting from chapter 1 up to chapter 10. And this is where Solomon says this of a fool, chapter 10 and verse 18. He who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads slander is a fool. If you spread slander, what is slander? That's an uncomplimentary remark about somebody, or a bad remark about somebody that's not true. And the interesting thing is the way Solomon puts it here, he who spreads slander. They may not have originated the slander, they didn't come up with a lie about somebody else, but they seem more than willing to spread it, to pass that along. And I'm not asking for a show of hands, but have you ever had the misfortune of passing along something about somebody else that you thought it was true, and you found out, oh, it's not true, and I told something. Now what do you got to do? Now you got to backtrack, and you got to go, oh, hey, listen, I said that about so-and-so, but that wasn't true, and I should have kept my mouth shut and should have found out what I needed, what the facts were before I spoke. But sometimes we don't do that. And fools don't care. Fools don't care. Fools don't care about what comes out of their mouth that it might hurt somebody else. They just don't have that in them. And so one of the marks of fools is that they spread slander. And sometimes you'll hear them doing it and you'll think, if you're wise, you won't want to be in on that conversation. Chapter 12, verse 16. And I like what Bud said. Brother, I appreciate that remark about looking into the Word like it is a mirror. That's how James refers to it. The perfect law of liberty, it's like a mirror. We look into it and it reflects on ourselves. And so when I read these, I'm thinking, well, man, how does this apply to me? Chapter 12 and verse 16. A fool's anger is known at once. A fool's anger is known at once. There's no thinking about it. There's no wondering about it. You just get angry, and so boom, you throw it out there. And Solomon says this is the mark of a fool. What I have to learn about myself is that I need to control my anger. And most of the time, I think I have my anger under control, but then something happens. You've heard the phrase, people being triggered these days. Well, all of us have our triggers. And somebody will say something to me or do something and it just triggers me, and man, I'm hot just that fast. I can't remember a time when I behaved like that and it was good. Solomon says a fool's anger is known at once. A wise man will be in control of his passions. But this is the mark of a fool. Chapter 12, verse 23, just down a little bit from that one. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. And I think of this in context. Why would you conceal knowledge? I don't think we're talking about the kinds of things that enlighten other people. I think we're talking about knowledge about things that probably ought to be kept private. And there are other passages that speak to that as well, about keeping something under wraps that ought to be under wraps and not making your whole mind known. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. They just put everything out there. They proclaim it. When you think about somebody proclaiming, what do you think of? Speaking out in the open, speaking loudly, speaking so everybody will hear. And Solomon says this is one of the marks of a fool. He proclaims folly. While a prudent man, a wise man, will conceal some things, other people just keep prattling on. It's related to verse 16, when it says a fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. A lot of these proverbs are closely associated. You'll see that when you read through it. Some things are dishonorable and they need to be kept under wraps. Other times, some things are dishonorable and they need to be brought out in the open. It just depends on the context. And Jesus did both. By the way, when you read through the Proverbs, you'll see you'll see the mind of Christ. You read through Proverbs and then you read through the New Testament and you see Jesus practicing everything that Solomon says is wisdom. And eschewing. That's a good word, isn't it? Eschewing. I don't use that very much. But that's what Jesus does with the foolish stuff. He doesn't come into it. Chapter 13. Boy, this is a good one. Not so much for the fool himself, but for those who might be associated with the fool, because this one says, chapter 13, verse 20, he who walks with a wise man will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. So what's that say to us? That's right. It says, look to your companions. How do they behave? How do they talk? Because the companion of fools, You may not think yourself to be a fool, but if you are a companion of fools, Solomon is saying that you will suffer harm. You can't be associated with people who live in foolish ways and not suffer harm from that. That's how is it that Paul wrote about this in 1 Corinthians? It was in the controversy over the resurrection. And he was asking, how say some of you that there is no resurrection? And then later on he would report about that. Evil companions do what? They corrupt good morals. That's what we're seeing here in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20. The companion of fools will suffer harm. Do not be corrupted by the foolish. Don't be associated with that crowd. This doesn't mean when you know people who need to be reached out to with the gospel that you can't go to them and speak with them and visit with them and be associated with them in that regard. But this is talking about who you hang out with, who you spend your time with, who you just let your hair down with. I can't really that's a figure term, letting your hair down, obviously, but that's what Solomon is talking about here. If you're a companion of fools, you're going to suffer harm. Chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. This one, a lot of these you have to think about a little bit. Verse 8, chapter 14. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way. What's that mean? That means self-examination. You take a look at yourself. That's what Paul wrote about in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. Let every man examine himself to see whether or not he is in the faith. And so this calls for self-examination. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way. You ever stop and think about yourself? How am I living? How am I doing? What's my speech like? What's the impact of my life like upon my wife or upon my husband or upon my children, my extended family? What's the impact of my life and my actions like among my brothers and sisters in Christ? What's my impact like at work or at school, everywhere I go? How am I doing? What kind of response does my behavior engender from others? So the wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way. You've got to take a look at yourself. But the foolishness of fools is deceit. How does that work? Even that passage we talked about a little bit ago from 1 Corinthians 15. I think it's 15:33, isn't it? Evil companions corrupt good morals. What does Paul write just before he says that? He says, do not be deceived. Now, who's going to deceive you with regard to bad company? Is it going to be the bad company or is it going to be yourself? It's going to be yourself. And so when I read this, I think the foolishness of fools is deceit, and sometimes the one the fool deceives is himself. The fool deceives himself when he says, oh, I'm a great guy, I'm okay, I don't need to improve anymore, I don't need to listen to wisdom, I don't need to keep my thoughts to myself and not say everything that's on my mind, I don't need to guard from speaking slander. The fool never thinks about those kinds of things, he just goes and does all that stuff, and that's why he is a fool. And then there's verse 9. Fools mock at sin. Oh, it's no big deal. Yeah, I use a little profane language here and there every now and then, or I tell some dirty jokes here and there, or I do this. You fill in the blank with whatever it is. A wise man will say, yeah, I do that. I know I shouldn't. Because we all do some things that we know we shouldn't. And we do things we don't want to do, but we do. That's what Paul wrote about in Romans chapter 7. The things that I do, I know I should do, but I don't do. And what I don't want to do, that's the very thing that I do. Paul had that same struggle as every man and every woman does. But the fool mocks at it. Doesn't mean anything. It's no big deal. And I've known people who, and I guess all of us have our limits with regard to all kinds of things. Sometimes it's the vocabulary we have, what words we will allow ourselves to say, just how vulgar will we go. Maybe we won't use the real profane words, but we'll use some vulgar terms. Or maybe it's not the vocabulary per se, but it's topics of conversation we'll allow ourselves to talk about. And maybe it's not conversation that we have, but it's conversation that we buy when we purchase a movie or a book. And we bring these things into our lives, and we've got this kind of sin, and we say, oh, it doesn't really mean it's not anything. We have to make a lot of judgments in life, because Solomon is saying that fools will mock at sin. But among the upright, there's goodwill. We will to do good. That's what I say. You notice how I said we? Because what am I doing? Oh, I'm putting myself among the upright, right? Isn't that what we do? Everybody else is the bad guy, not me. Chapter 18. And I want to tell you right now, this one doesn't count for preachers. I just want to make that clear. Chapter 18, verse 2. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind. When I read this, the phrase or the saying came to myself, he loves to hear himself talk. Because that seems what it says, isn't it? A fool does not delight in understanding, but what does he delight in? He wants to reveal his own mind. Now you see the contrast? There is understanding, and then there's the revelation of the fool's mind. That's not understanding. Have you ever done this in a conversation? Once again, I'm not asking for a show of hands. You're having a conversation with somebody, and you realize you're not listening to them. What are you doing? You're formulating a response, or you're thinking of what you're going to say next, or you're standing there politely smiling, thinking, I wish you'd shut up so I could say what I'm going to say, because what I'm going to say is really interesting, or really smart, or really whatever. You probably don't ever do that. I've heard of people that do. But that's what Solomon seems to be talking about here. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind. Just got something, you just got to say it. And have you ever thought about, you're in a conversation, and after you've said something, you think to yourself, why did I even say that? That didn't really add anything to what's going on. And yet, we say things sometimes. We just got to say it. But then there's chapter 19, verse 1. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than he who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Perverse in speech. What comes to your mind when you think of someone who is perverse in speech? Maybe it's somebody who, as soon as they open their mouth, okay, I'd be careful what this guy says, because I don't know if I can trust anything he says to be the truth. Or I might need to bring my kids around behind me because I don't know exactly what's going to come out of his mouth. Or it might be some twisted take on a moral issue. It just floors me. I saw a picture of a young lady, and she had a t-shirt that said, the abortion team. Really? The abortion team? You want to be known as somebody who's on a team for abortion? Which sort of tells you the mindset. Because when somebody argues, well, we need to have abortion for women whose lives are endangered or some reason, no. They just want abortion. They want the right. They want the freedom. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. Floors me. The last one we'll look at tonight, and it's two of them, It's in chapter 26 is the first one. And I saved these two for last. There's a lot more things that Solomon says about fools, but I thought these might be enough to give us something to chew on tonight. Chapter 26 and verse 12, and then 29 and verse 20. 26 and 12 and 29 and 20. Those are the last two. 26:12 says this. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? What's the next line? There is more hope for whom? More hope for a fool than for somebody who's wise in his own eyes. Wow, that's saying something. Because we've been talking about all the things that fools do and how bad that is. But Solomon says, if you think you're hot stuff, there's more hope for a fool than there is for you. Well, that'll bring you down. That'll level you to where you ought to be. And then 29 and 20. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? Have you ever been hasty in your words? If you've learned from that, good. If you haven't learned from that, pay attention to what he says here. Do you know a man who is hasty in his words? Solomon says there is more hope for a fool than for him. Rein them back in. Hold on to those words. Maybe they need said, but you better think about it first and make sure. Because if you're hasty in your words, Solomon says there's more hope for a fool than there is for that guy. These things have helped me a lot. I wish I could say that because I've read these things and thought about them, I've mastered them all. But I have a little ways to go with some of these. How about you? Keep reading Proverbs. Keep encouraging young people, especially young men, I say, to read Proverbs, because for me, this has been one of those practical helps to move my thinking towards godliness that I have found in my days, right next to the Gospels. All right, well, that's the lesson for tonight. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God, but we know there is. And if tonight your relationship with him is not what it ought to be, we're going to stand and sing a song to encourage you, to let us help you with that. We want so much to either pray with you if you want prayers, or to help you obey the gospel if that's your intent tonight. We ask you to come forward and let us know how we can help you with either one of those while we stand and sing the song of encouragement. Harold?